Hey everybody, this is Kodak here, and I just noticed that I have not done the follow-up video yet for the accessibility video, so we're going to fix that right now. Now, for the most part, people understood the concept of the video, what specifically I was trying to do, how I was trying to talk about how it's important to make it so that it's easy for people to try out your game. That is probably the thing that these past few videos, these past couple of videos, accessibility and Starter Decks, the thing I've stressed the most is it needs to be really simple for people to try out your game. And not just, try out the game, but to, physically get their hands on it, see how the cards are, see how it plays, in real life. That base entry point where people can, try out your game before they commit a lot of money to it is super important. Like I said, it's sort of like an onboarding cost. It's something where you're not making as much immediate profit, but the idea is it's investing in profit down the line because now you have people who are playing your game, especially now that we live in an age where, so many video games on your phone are free to start. And, I could talk about all the despicable practices there all the time, although that reminds me, I remember I made a comment ages ago about the importance of, physical ownership of things and how, the game company can't just charge into your house and destroy all of your rare cards, and then it actually happened. But you notice that the one time that it has happened so far was a major incident that everybody was talking about. Meanwhile, we have all sorts of free-to-play games that shut down every year, dozens that shut down every year, taking people's collections and money with it, and you barely hear a peep about that. So take that as you will. That's the difference between physical ownership and digital ownership. Although there's been a resistance to try to make it so that you don't actually own the things you buy. But, as the saying goes, if purchasing isn't ownership, then piracy isn't theft. That's my stance on it. I am very much, right to repair, right to ownership sort of person, in case you haven't noticed by all the physical media I have lying around. But, I did bring it up at the start of the video, but a lot of people were actually disappointed that I didn't talk about the thing that accessibility is normally used for. Now, when I talked about accessibility, I talked about how easy is it for players to just assemble the pieces necessary to play your game, casually or competitively, which is something that I think is important. A lot of people, I think, forget that players are half of your game's content, because aside from the cards, it's what your players will interact with the most are other players. But a lot of people wanted me to talk about, actual accessibility. And I didn't really talk about that because I tend to handle it on a case-by-case basis. And it's usually pretty brief. This isn't video games where there's all sorts of accessibility options for the deaf or the people who have, shaky hands or things like that. This is really, it's pretty simple as far as accessibility goes. Accessibility in card games is things like the size of your font and whether or not your cards are friendly to color blindness. Color blindness is a big one because a lot of games, they try to use color to designate their different card types, and a lot of those colors, most often the colors that are used are red and green. The problem is that's the most common form of color blindness. It's literally like how dogs see the world. So when it comes up in games that are guilty of that, I tend to say you need an identification symbol for these colors. Don't just rely on the actual colors on the card because not everybody can see that. That's a pretty basic thing. It's things that a lot of people talk about. The same with the font. You want to make sure that your font is legible and readable even from a small distance away. I know when you're designing your cards on the computer, it can be kind of easy to miss that because on the computer, the cards are enormous. They're the size of the special cards you get in the Pokemon sets and stuff like that. So if you're working on cards, try actually printing them out at play size to make sure that everything is readable. Yes, do it on your crummy laser printer because that is going to be the biggest stress test of how readable your cards are is if you look at it on a printer. But that's really about it for accessibility as far as, actually countering disability and things like that. I know there's a lot of games that have a basic reading requirement or require you to do a lot of math, but I would say those are pain points rather than accessibility options. I would not be surprised if a bunch of people dropped Yu-Gi-Oh because they're not big fans of calculating breakthrough damage, and in which case they are served elsewhere by games that use, a handful of cards to detract life points, or which use much lower, less complex numbers. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you have to keep in your head in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's a lot of things you have to keep straight, and honestly, I like my games a bit more simple. I'm not great at handling all of those different variables all at once. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players are a step beyond, believe me. But some people, back when I did one of my Sins videos, the one where I talk about having too much junk, I made an aside about games like Bakugan and Battleclaw, which feature like a skill or dexterity game as part of their mechanic. And even though I stressed that they are outliers to the point that I literally crawled underneath my table to illustrate just how much of outliers they are, and that was definitely not a trick because I'd forgotten to film the section that had already broken down the set and all of that, people still went into the comments and basically called me ableist for mentioning that Bakugan and Battleclaw exists. And I'm sorry, I have a huge problem with that attitude. Saying that Bakugan is ableist when, it's a small dexterity game is like saying that yo-yos, skateboards, and baseball are ableist because not everybody is capable of doing so. And honestly, not only is that really petty, it diminishes the efforts of people who put in the effort to get, like, really good and skilled at it. Like, I guarantee you, the vast majority of people who are into sports like baseball could not actually play the game to save their lives. They instead appreciate how people who are at the top of their craft are this good at playing the game. I mean, that's my relationship that I and my twitchy, unresponsive fingers have with fighting games. So I know exactly where that's coming from. Do I demand that fighting games, adhere to me and my twitchy fingers? No. I appreciate what the people who are the best at them are capable of doing. I understand my limitations. I beg of you, please do not fall into the trap of calling something ableist just because not everybody on planet Earth is capable of doing so, okay? This isn't trying to get into a store to buy groceries or medicine. It is literally an entertainment product akin to a yo-yo, a skateboard, or baseball. Not everybody's great at those either, but I don't see anybody, like, frothing at the mouth at every pub that has a crocodile board in it. So, that's my stance on the matter. It's not ableist. It is a pain point, perhaps, for people who are not great at dexterity, but have you seen, like, some of the trick shot videos they do for Bakugan? And honestly, if we're going to talk about ableism, we should maybe talk about how Battleclaw uses the plastic figurines and they come in green and red, which might not be easy for a colorblind person to tell apart. They need, like, an additional symbol. I did say that with Bakugan, that the first run of Battle Planet Bakugan did not have faction symbols on them, and as a result was entirely color dependent, and I called that out as not a great piece of design. I know where my priorities stand, I know where the priorities ought to be. And honestly, it disappointed me more that people were so willing and easy to cast aside a possible avenue for game design and development. And I admit I might have been guilty of it a bit myself. I majorly reassessed after the Star Wars Unlimited video because, I realized that I had allowed myself to fall into a hole, and I have pulled myself out of that. I did a whole, like, audio diary and the whole thing, if anybody cares to hear about it. But yes, anyway, in regards to, like, actual, like, accessibility, you really do need to worry about your font size to make sure that most people can read it, and you do need to be concerned about color so that anybody who is colorblind can distinguish between your different card types in ways that are not dependent on color. Basically, if your game is playable in black and white, then you're probably on the right track. But, like I said, most people, I think, understood the emphasis I made in the video. A lot of people also followed me on the idea of rare cards. Although, to reiterate something from my Rarity iceberg, I have no problem with a game that has, genuinely special cards that are not easy to find. They just should not be things that define the format. So these are things, like the special alternative art printings of cards. These are things like the fabled rares in Flesh and Blood. Like, they're nice, but they are far from deck defining. I really don't have a problem with those happening occasionally. I take issue when you put them into starter decks because it's an attempt to lift the cap on a product that you really shouldn't be buying more than a couple of. But I really don't have an issue there. But the thing is, making your game accessible for people to play at a high level. Like, if you look at the example with Pokemon, the way Pokemon really makes their money is by being collectible. And this is why I stressed in my Elstrels video that if they really want to succeed, they need to make sure that their game develops an identity so that people will be like collecting the cards for the purpose of collecting them. The most valuable cards in Pokemon are the ones that are like rare printings of popular characters. Like Iono is for the example I used. Iono is a good card. It is a card that will run you about like $3 to $4 because it is an important card. It is the modern day version of the card N, which is and always has been a very good card. Iono just has an extra stipulation that that it can't be the final card in your hand. You don't just get to draw a bunch of cards off of Iono. But there are at least two alternative versions of Iono, and those are the ones that are considered the valuable ones. You do have to have a collectible angle to really start to make your money and help people have a feeling that their collection has value. So you look at Pokemon, you look at Digimon, they have like maybe one or two alternative printings of their capstone cards for people to track down and show off with. Like Buddy Fight back in the day before I despised everything about Bushiroad. They had the Buddy Rares, and if you showed up with a Buddy Rare in your Buddy slot, that got attention. That was how those cards are supposed to work. You can bling out your deck. Like I said, blinging out your deck appeals to Timmies as much as it does to Spikes, because Timmies like it because, it's shiny and cool and powerful. Spikes love it because of the prestige it gives them. You really can't lose by having some fancy upscaled cards. Like, I think really only Johnnies and Mel's aren't interested in having one or two alternative collectibles because they're more about the labbing and stuff like that. They don't care as much about having fancy copies of the cards, but your Timmies and your Spikes, oh, they eat that kind of thing up. Although, in talking about accessibility, a lot of people took issue with how I talked about the Grand Archive deck. Like, some people straight up accused me of misinformation, and I'm like, what misinformation? The information I used is literally the sell sheet provided by the company that makes the game. So, let's break it down here. The problem I have with the Sylvie set is that it has, at the start, what seems like some good ideas, but then, when combined together, becomes a bad idea that then has more bad ideas stacked on top of it. So Sylvie is considered before these sets, Sylvie is considered the weakest character in the game. The starter deck is considered the worst. So like, okay, so let's put out a deck that can help bring Sylvie up to par. That's a fine idea. And to make it so that people only have to buy one, let's make it so that the deck includes full playsets of everything. Okay, that's a fair idea. I've talked about how it's not a perfect idea in my video on starter decks, but fair enough. If it's supposed to be more of an upgrade than a deck, then, having it as one is fine. Okay, let's make a special box set that has a bunch of cool stuff in it, special sleeves and life counters all in a nice fancy box. Okay, that's a cool idea. Let's shove all of that together and charge a bunch of money for it. That's where we have our first bad idea right there, is making it so that if you want to buy a copy of the starter set, you have to buy this big fancy kit. That, I think, is an issue. It would be like, I know it's something like everybody complains when, one really cool character is included in like this big expensive set that you're expected to buy the whole thing of. Like, that's one of my big issues with the new Star Trek game that WizKids is putting out. It's a $150 starter set, and one of the ships in there is the Defiant from Deep Space Nine, my favorite Star Trek. And I don't want to have to pay $150 for one of the small ships for the one, show that I actually like out of all of those things. That set is honestly a joke, and it would surprise me if a lot of people really get into it, because there's like a Star Wars game that's also sort of an Armada game similar to this. It has 13 minis in it and is $120. It is so much cheaper, and you get so much more in there with all like the fancy like trackers and stuff like that, but I'm getting a little off track here. So here's the thing. One could argue that this set, despite being $50, is offset by the fact that you only have to buy one. The deck has full playset in it, after all. Couple of complications there. First of all, the actual sets are sold in cases of 8. So a store would have to buy 8 of these boxes in order to get the ones they need. So if they have like 1 or 2 pre-orders, that's really not going to do them any favors because now they have 6 more to sell. They might be able to get it partitioned via a distributor, but at that point, that distributor has to work in chunks of 8 to try to sell it all, and that might not happen. That is going to be a huge pain in the butt, especially if the effort put into making that Sylvie set is either a total dud from the start or gets quickly, overshadowed. That means that the Sylvie deck is suddenly not worth it, and now it's $50 for a box and some stuff. Oh, but they didn't stop there with the bad ideas. You thought you were only supposed to buy 1 of those? Oh, my sweet summer child. You forgot about the collector super rare. Woo! I hate these things. And like I said, nobody can say that it's sour grapes because I got Sylvie Friend Loved by All in my very first attempt. I am literally probably the only person on the planet who was in the market for a normal version of this card because I literally did not get one in the deck I bought. But they brought it back for this set. You get like 3 random booster packs that might have a collector's super rare in them. And it's the only way to get those collector super rares. And it might not even be the character on the box you got. So no, they don't expect you to buy one. They expect you to shell out $50 to buy as many of the darn things as you possibly can. And that is, like I said, that is the most hideous idea ever. I mean, $15 for a crank for I think it's like a 1 in 72 chance to actually get the card in here. That is bad enough. But $50 for a pull on the crank? That is way worse. Like I said, it's good ideas, an up-to-date Sylvie deck, and a kit with a bunch of cool Sylvie stuff in it. But then they mash those together, which turns it into a bad idea, and then they add more bad ideas on top of that. That is my problem with the box. They would be better off if they had put out the Sylvie deck on its own. It doesn't have to be a perfect playset. It's not at all bad to incentivize people to buy multiple copies of a starter deck. I have pretty clearly said that that's not necessarily a problem. Put it out as like a Sylvie Deluxe Edition. Make it $20 or something. I would honestly take out the deck from that box. I don't think I would have a single issue with that Sylvie collection box if they took out the deck and replaced it with 5 booster packs. Just make it a straight up just ETB, because that way it's something that everybody benefits from when they buy it. Even if they don't like the deck inside, buying multiples, they're getting more booster packs, they're getting more copies of the stuff they like. You could sell it to anybody. Even if they already have the Sylvie deck, they can buy that and get some kind of benefit from it. Even if they're maybe not big fans of Sylvie, they still get handy kit in there. It is a product that is a lot more likely to churn, and it lifts the cap without being, skeezy about it. Although, if I want to talk about accessibility, there's, of course, War Machine. So War Machine was actually the first war game I ever played. If we want to talk accessibility, boy howdy. It was the first war game I ever played because it was cheaper than Warhammer, but nowadays a 1-player starter set is $200. And it doesn't even come with dice. It's $200 for admittedly what would be like the equivalent of 1,200 points of miniatures in the Warhammer community, but $200 is a lot to ask, and they couldn't even be bothered to include rules or data cards or even dice. I'm sorry, is a set of dice is some dollar store dice really too much to ask to put into your $200 starter set? This game, like I said, it fell off a cliff. There's also the fact that they did basically an Age of Sigmar reset where none of the old sets are legal anymore. You have to get the new stuff in order to play, and yeah, they really fell off a cliff, old Privateer Press. I was rooting for them. We were all rooting for them. But yeah, if you want accessibility that genuinely is a joke, this is it right here. It's almost enough for 1 player to play, and it's more expensive than anything I've ever seen. They used to have really cheap starter sets too that were $40. Honestly, kind of a joke, and they wonder why nobody plays their games anymore. So yeah, that is my thought on accessibility. Like I said, most people understood the assignment and what I was going for about how, costing out players is a bad idea. You don't want to try to immediately profit off of people. Cheap starter decks to get people playing, so then you can sell them the more profitable products. At the end of the day, you are running a business, so a lot of people, I don't expect games to like give me everything I want for free. I do expect like a reasonable entry, but at the end of the day, they are here to be a business and make money. As long as they do it in a way where they're like delivering a good game and being, honest about it and not trying to make me buy 70 starter decks to get one card, I generally don't have a problem with it. So I do have a couple of scripts that I have half cooked up. One of them is finding your hook, which is figuring out how to identify what it is about your game that really draws people to it. Another one is about pain points, which I've actually discussed a little bit today. Understanding the difference between an accessibility thing and a pain point is a pretty important part of the conversation, if you ask me. But yeah, until next time, we have been having a lot of fun over at the Patreon. We are having like people playtesting their games like practically every day. Just $1 a month is enough to get you onto the Discord if you want to do things like, show off your game, playtest other people's games, get a lot of feedback, a lot of understanding. It has been a great experience, and I'm thankful to all the people in that community who have really contributed to helping make that, a great thing that works really well. So, yeah, until next time, this is Kodak signing off.